Hey everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today I'm going to be showing you how to install an ATOTO A6 Android head unit in our 2011 Nissan Xterra. This process should apply to all second-gen Nissan Xterras and Nissan Frontiers. So in order to do this job on this particular vehicle, you're going to need an Xterra dash kit or a Frontier dash kit. They're both the same. You're going to need the wiring harness for the radio, the wiring harness for the antenna, some heat shrink in order to cover your connections after you've soldered them, and I like to always put sleeving over my wiring harnesses because I like to go a little bit overboard. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get this stereo unpacked, laid out on the bench so you can see what all comes with it and what all we're going to need to do, and I'll come right back whenever I have that done. Alright, so once you get the package open, this is what you're going to find inside the head unit's box. You have the head unit itself, a USB extension cable, Wi-Fi and GPS antennas, the wiring harness, a microphone, a bezel, a couple screen protectors, and some universal mounting brackets. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go jump in the truck and show you guys how to take out the old stereo, and we'll figure out what we need to do to install this new one. Now that we're in the truck, we're ready to start pulling the stereo out, and the first part that you need to take off is this piece up here. So you can see I have it loose, and the way that you do that is take a plastic pry tool like this, slip it in back behind here, and in the back corners it'll pop up really easily, and then from there you should just be able to grab it and gently pry on it, and it should just pop right off. After that, you're going to have 3 screws in here, which I'm going to bring the camera up forward to show you, and you're going to use a number 1 or a number 2 Phillips screwdriver to pull those out. And at that point we should be able to have this whole stereo console loose and able to move around and flip forward. So I'm going to show you where those screws are and what screwdriver to use on them, and then I'm going to show you how the stereo comes out. So these are the 3 screws you're going to need to remove. This one in the center, this one over here, and its corresponding one on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and use a number 1 Phillips screwdriver, pull those screws out, and then show you what the console looks like after those screws are out. Alright, so as you can see I have the stereo loose, and what I did was while it was sitting in the dash, after I took the screws out, I grabbed up here, pulled it out, a little bit of force, not too much, and the whole entire console kind of hinged forward and came out. So at this point there's a bunch of wires back behind that you need to disconnect. I'm going to disconnect them and then show you what spots you need to disconnect once it's out of the truck, because I can't get a camera back there at the moment. So I'm going to be right back and show you those connections. We now have the console disconnected and out of the truck, so I wanted to show you again all of the wires you're going to need to pull. So we have the emergency flasher connector, just has a little push tab on the top, push it, pull it out. The passenger airbag warning light, again, push tab on the top, pull it out. The antenna for the radio, this one has a push tab on the side, push it, pull it out. And then the main radio harness, it's got a tab on the top, push it, pull it out. And you also have the climate control harness. This one, when it's connected to the climate control, this tab is engaged like this. So what you need to do is push down a little tab up on the top and crank that over, and then this will just come right out of the climate control. So I'm going to go ahead, show you what the console looks like, pull it out of the truck, and show you what we need to do to swap the radios around. This is what the back of the radio console looks like outside of the truck. So in order to start installing the new stereo and the new stereo's dash kit, we're going to need to pull the old radio faceplate and climate control faceplate combo out. So you have about 10 Torx T20 screws that you're going to need to pull out in order to remove the stereo, console, and faceplate assembly from the rest of this vent assembly that has also the passenger airbag light and emergency flasher button on it. So there's 10 black Torx T20 screws that you're going to need to take out. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take those out off camera and show you what it looks like whenever it's pulled apart. I now have the radio and climate control removed from the center console bezel. You need to remove 10 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you also need to release 4 tabs, 2 right here and then 2 on the opposite side. And at that point, the whole radio and climate control assembly should just come right out. So now I'm going to show you what you need to do to remove the climate control from the old bezel and put it onto the new dash kit. And then I'm going to show you how to install the new stereo onto the new dash kit as well. So I'll be right back with those components swapped out for this one. We now have the climate control installed in the new faceplate. As you can see, everything lines up, all the buttons we checked, they work, knobs turn, no interferences there. So in order to take it out of the old one and put it into the new one, you need to use a Torx T10 driver and remove these 4 copper plated screws. All you're going to do is pull those 4 out. This will just slip out of the old one, you slip into the new one and screw them in. I will caution, be careful when you're putting the new ones in, because this plastic is brittle and the holes that the screws go into aren't quite large enough. So if you screw them in as is, it'll crack the bosses a little bit. Should still hold in securely. This one is secure, but that's something to be aware of. Also, the angle down here between the angle of this tab that's on the actual climate control unit and the angle of the mounting boss don't quite match up. So be careful not to over tighten that, otherwise you could end up snapping this tab off of the climate control unit. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the old stereo out now, see what we need to do as far as reusing the old bracketry or using new bracketry is concerned, and I'll be back to show you our solution. We now have the new radio test fit into the bezel assembly, and we have one of the plastic brackets that came with the bezel assembly attached to the radio. We tried to use the metal brackets and everything lines up, it would be workable, but this tab down here sat a little bit less than a 1/4 inch off of the mounting boss. So instead of doing that, we're going to go ahead and try using the plastic mounting brackets. The only thing that we need to do to these to make them fit perfectly is open up these slots a little bit where these screw holes are on the radio. All we need to do is take the bracket off and open up the slot a little bit, because the screw holes sit slightly off. So we're going to go ahead and do that on both brackets. But before we mount everything and get everything put back in the car, obviously we need to wire up the stereo, make sure it works, test all that out. So I'm going to take the bracket off, go ahead and modify that. But right now we're going to jump to the electrical portion of this and wiring up the stereo. Alright, so after doing a bit of test fitting and creating these wiring harnesses, we're back. So what we did was, first, before we soldered up and finished up the wiring harnesses, we just did a good old twist and tape, taped them together, took the stereo by itself, put it in the truck, and made sure it worked. Made sure our wiring harnesses were built correctly before we soldered them, before we heat shrunk them, and before we sleeved them. So we tested that, we made sure that the antenna harness worked correctly, and all of that worked fine. The stereo seems to be working perfectly at this point. So the harnesses are done, soldered, sleeved, everything. The climate control is installed in the new faceplate, and I'm about to install the radio in the new faceplate. You can see what I did to the plastic brackets was open up these slots where the mounting screws are going to be going, and opening up all four allows us to have it mount perfectly to this as well as this on the faceplate. So with that, I'm going to get this bolted up in the faceplate, and I'm going to go ahead and get the faceplate bolted back up into the console, which is doing a reverse of disassembly as far as putting the Torx screws in that hold it all together. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and drop everything back into the truck and make sure it works one last time, and then show you where I put the antennas for the Wi-Fi and the GPS. So I'll be back at that point. Before we put everything back in the truck, I just wanted to show you what it looks like mounted up in the console. And if you'll notice, I also have the antennas for the Wi-Fi and GPS up here. Not 100% sure where I'm going to mount them, but I have a pretty good idea, and I'll show you that once they are mounted in the truck. So now I'm going to take this, put it in the truck, and I'll show you that once it's all mounted up. One last thing before the stereo goes back in is making sure that the ground is connected. So Nissan's, their ground does not run through the stereo wiring harness, it's a chassis ground. So for us, our best way to ground it was using this screw over here. This over here is used for an aftermarket gauge that we have in the dash, so we figured that that would be an equally good ground point for the stereo. So that's where we ran our ground to. You can see the wiring harness for the stereo is right here. It's connected down there to the factory harness. And then we have the factory antenna harness coming out here. So at this point, it should be just plug and play. Everything should snap back together, screw back together. And we're going to show you where we mounted those antennas once we get them mounted. At this point, we have the antennas mounted for the Wi-Fi and the GPS. As you can see, the Wi-Fi antenna is mounted right here, down this little recessed area that's actually part of the stereo console itself. It's the area that's accessed for one of the mounting screws, and with it mounted there, you can still access the mounting screws, so that's a perfect location for it. The Wi-Fi antenna, the GPS antenna is a little bit bulky, so what we did was mount it on the back side of the little tray that goes up here, and it happens to be in such a position and happens to be the perfect size to be able to mount there with its double-sided adhesive and then fall down into one of the access holes up here whenever you snap the tray on. So if you take a look, you can get the tray situated here. And it snaps on perfectly, and you would never know that they're there. Finally, we're done. So we have the stereo installed. As you can see, it's on. My phone's connected via Bluetooth. Just to give you a little bit of a demo, here's how it works as far as the Bluetooth audio is concerned. Turn it up a little bit. So as you can see, the stereo works great. Thanks for watching.